so I have been having an absolute blast playing Sea of Thieves. I was lucky enough to get into the alpha program, and I've been rocking it in both the open and closed betas and stress tests, and having a jolly old time on the high seas. Yar. For one thing, it's an incredibly beautiful game, and I've really been enjoying my time exploring the world and experiencing the weather and sailing and having fun fighting other pirates. March 20 can't come soon enough as far as I'm concerned. The sea is calling to me. While I wait, I decided to put my enthusiasm to work, try out some new art materials I procured, and produce one of these wicked looking bounty skulls from the game. To begin with, I needed a prototype skull form, so I took some patterns from this small resin skull and scaled them up. I'm going to move fast here because patterning and foam forming is not new on this channel or on many others. And I've got 2 versions of this to make, this prototype being only the first. Knowing that this is a prototype, I worked very rough and very fast, trying to get to a usable form as quickly as possible. Lots of modifications to the pattern were required on the fly. Eye holes, but not for breakfast. The in-game skulls lack a zygomatic arch, that kind of bridge of bone that connects the cheekbone to the back of the skull near the ear and provides a pocket for the jawbone. I also exaggerated the peak on the brow to give it the more sinister edge, and went to it with the Dremel, smoothing out all the surfaces. Once I was pretty happy with the shape, I began repatterning off it, this time taking more care to include alignment marks and indications of where I needed angle cuts or to exaggerate the existing pattern. An idea occurred to me not long ago that Selly's No More Gaps might provide a nice water-based alternative to epoxy-based fillers for foam work. It has a water cleanup and dries to a flexible, sandable finish. I tried it out bogging into the cracks of the prototype skull. I carefully cut all the pieces for the second skull with a very sharp knife. And I cut finer angles with a smaller, more maneuverable blade. To create the mounting hole in the base of the skull, I sharpened a piece of PVC pipe to use as a hole saw. Locally available Seeker contact cement was used throughout this build. The handle of my glue pot proved to be a pretty good anvil for heat forming the foam. Once the skull was all together, it was time to begin detailing. An old smooth sanding head for the Dremel proved to be a good balance point between carving and being too rough. I was glad I'd had some practice on the prototype though. I discovered a new method for smoothing sanded foam. Hit it with a heat gun and burnish it with the non-sticky side of masking tape to produce a really nice smooth surface. decided these details would look cooler if they were carved into the surface of the skull some. Turns out the blade I was using was sharper than I realized, and they really opened up when I hit them with the heat gun. Here I'm starting with the no more gaps, spreading it into the cracks and smoothing the surface with a wet finger. I used it to fill some of the depths of the cuts I'd put in the surface of the skull and the teeth. By keeping it wet, a pretty smooth surface can be achieved. I left it overnight to cure and then sanded it in the morning. I was very happy with the smoothness of the finish achieved, but I decided to give it a second layer. This time I concentrated on trying to cover up the seams. I also went back into the cuts I'd made into the surface, but this proved too much as they were nearly invisible in the finished product. I experimented with using it more structurally to smooth transitions between two pieces of foam, and I'm pretty impressed with how that turned out. After sanding again, it was time to prime and begin painting. On reflection, I'm not actually sure this was entirely necessary, but I decided to seal the whole surface with FlexBond, which is a product new to me. It's a PVA-like but dries to a flexible finish. It's a little bit fussy and tacky, but water smoothing it works surprisingly well. I left creating the detail cracks in the surface of the skull and some of the battle damage until near the end here so that they would be nice and crisp and sharp. I also recut some of the nicks and cuts in the face of the skull before coating the whole thing in a second coat of FlexBond, paying particular attention to the freshly exposed foam. Finally, it's time to start with paint. I gave the whole thing 2 coats of an equal part mix of black and silver acrylic paints. Once those had had a chance to dry, I gave the entire surface 2 dry brush coats of pure silver to give it texture. I then used some black shoe polish to ink into the cracks and add depth. I mixed up a nice aqua to use as the base paint for all the glowing areas. I painted this into the nostrils and eye sockets to check the colour. A little bit more silver was added to add shine to all the leading surfaces. I spent way too long adding detail and colour variation in the base coat of the glowing markings as I underestimated the opacity of the glow paint itself. By the end of this layer it was starting to look pretty cool. And here's the star material, Stuart Semple's Lit Glow Pigment, to be mixed with Stuart Semple's own Super Matte Super Base and a little bit of water. Water first. As you can see, it's glowing already. I mixed a quite thick batch with a heavy pigment load, and 1 teaspoon of pigment proved enough for the whole project. Piece by piece I covered all the turquoise base on the skull. And the results? Well, the results were impressive. But we're not done yet. I also got some of Stuart Semple's Black 2.0, which is the mattest, blackest art material available on the market to everyone except Anish Kapoor. I put a line of that around both the eye sockets and the nostrils to make it look like the glow is coming from deeper within the skull. The glow from Lit when it's well charged is really very impressive. I let the boys do some of the painting on the prototype, but I finished it off myself, and then I coated them both with a nice clear coat to protect them. Overall, I'm really impressed with how this turned out, and I'm even considering making another using what I've learned. That be all, scallywags. I hope you, like me, have learned something from this. Thanks for watching.